The night sky above Earth looked calm, but inside Elias Ward's chest everything felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing against his heart. He stood at the edge of the military dock where transport ships waited like silent steel giants, their engines humming softly as if whispering the fate he could not escape. The wind brushed against his uniform but brought no comfort. It only reminded him that this was his final hour as a free man, his last moment before stepping into a life he never chose, a marriage he never wanted, a destiny shaped by debts he never created. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady the storm inside him. He was a soldier who had faced battles on distant moons, fought pirates in the cold rings of Titan, and survived ambushes that killed men stronger than him. Yet nothing had ever terrified him as much as this one decision, to give his life away in marriage to an alien princess he had never met, only because Earth's government demanded payment for a debt his family could not repay. The humiliation burned inside him. The sacrifice felt unbearable. But the alternative was worse, his mother losing their home, his brother being taken into forced labor, everything they had left crushed under merciless law. When the officer handed him the final contract tablet that morning, Elias felt like the world around him stopped breathing. The words were simple but brutal. "Your marriage ensures your family's survival." That line kept echoing in his mind like a cruel joke. He didn't even know what the alien princess looked like. Some said she was a hybrid, half human, half Aurelian, born with glowing eyes and a fragile body. Others said she was cursed, trapped in a palace of gold yet surrounded by fear and loneliness. Elias wasn't sure what was truth or rumor. All he knew was that she was waiting somewhere across the stars, while he was standing here on a dying Earth, swallowing his pride like poison behind him. The city lights flickered weakly, tall buildings covered in dust, transport lanes quiet at this hour. Earth wasn't the shining world it once was. Most nations were drowning in shortages, debts, and broken treaties. Selling a human groom to the Vanyx Empire felt like the last act of desperation, and Elias hated that he was the price they decided to pay. He felt like a weapon being traded, not a man with his own dreams. But when he thought of his mother's trembling hands, her voice saying she wished it were her instead of him, something inside Elias hardened with painful acceptance. He would carry this burden so they didn't have to. A loud metallic hiss filled the air as the transport ship opened its boarding ramp. Golden light spilled out like a path inviting him into the unknown. 3 elite guards approached him, their armor carved with alien symbols glowing faintly. They weren't human. Their tall frames and luminous eyes marked them as Aurelian escorts sent to retrieve him. Elias felt their gaze scanning him, not with hatred but with curiosity, as if they expected a monster or a wild beast. Humans had a terrible reputation in alien space, known for being stubborn, reckless, emotional, but Elias stood tall, refusing to let his fear show. Soldiers didn't bend, even when their hearts felt like breaking. "You will be treated with honor," one of the guards said, his voice strangely melodic. "Your union with Princess Lyra is of great importance." The words meant to comfort only made Elias feel more trapped. More aware of the weight on his shoulders, he wasn't just repaying a debt now. He was stepping into a political storm between 2 species, a marriage arranged not for love but for survival, a symbolic chain binding Earth to the powerful Aurelian throne. And he was the link. As he walked up the ramp, his boots echoing softly, Elias felt his breath tighten. The interior of the ship was warm and filled with golden light. Unlike anything built by human hands, the walls shimmered like living metal, responding gently to his presence. It felt magical, intimidating, beautiful. He reached out and touched the wall, feeling a soft pulse under his fingertips, like the ship itself was alive, watching him, judging him, silently asking if he was ready for the path ahead. Far across the galaxy at that same moment, Princess Lyra stood inside her crystal chamber, wiping tears from her silver blue eyes. She had cried almost every day since the marriage announcement. She didn't want a human groom, not because she hated humans, but because she feared rejection. She was neither fully Aurelian nor fully human. Trapped between 2 identities, treated as a symbol instead of a person, she wished her life belonged to her. Not to politics, not to ancient laws, not to this marriage that felt like an invisible prison. Her tears flowed quietly until the palace maid whispered, "He is on his way, princess." Lyra's trembling stopped for a moment. Something in her heart shifted, fear mixed with a strange warmth, a strange curiosity. She wondered if he would be cruel or gentle or distant. She wondered if he would look at her with disgust like many Aurelian nobles did, or if he would ignore her like a political object. She wished desperately, painfully, for someone to see her, Not as a princess, not as a treaty, but as a lonely girl who wanted to be loved. As the ship carrying Elias broke through the atmosphere and jumped into hyperspace, both their lives moved toward a moment neither of them understood, a moment that would change the fate of two worlds. Elias stared at the swirling blue lights outside the window, thinking he was walking into a life of chains, while Lyra clutched her heart, afraid her groom would hate her. Neither of them knew that their first meeting would shatter every belief they held about each other. Neither knew how destiny was silently pulling their souls closer, the universe watching, holding its breath, waiting for the moment when their eyes would meet and everything would change. The Aurelian ship drifted through golden starlight as it descended toward the Empire's homeworld, and Elias felt the weight of the universe pressing against his chest. He stood near the viewing deck, staring at the planet below, its surface glowing with rivers of molten silver and forests of blue-lit crystal. Nothing like Earth's fading cities. Nothing like the world he once knew. The planet looked alive, breathing, ancient, beautiful, and terrifying all at once, as if it was welcoming him and warning him at the same time. He tried to slow his breathing, but his heart refused to calm. Every second brought him closer to the marriage that would decide the fate of two species. The ship eased toward the grand palace dock, and golden towers rose into the sky like frozen sunbeams, their surfaces shifting with patterns of alien energy. Elias had seen many worlds as a soldier, but this was different. This was the center of power, the heart of the Aurelian Empire, a place where millions bowed to the royal bloodline, where laws were carved in light, and where one wrong step could ignite a war no one could survive. He swallowed hard, knowing he was the only human in this entire palace, the only one carrying the hopes of Earth and the weight of his own fear. The doors opened with a soft chime, releasing warm air that carried a sweet metallic scent. Aurelian soldiers stood in a perfect line, their armor glowing like starlight trapped in crystal. Their eyes followed Elias, not hostile but cautious, as if measuring the human who had been chosen to marry their princess. Whispers floated across the hall, sharp, curious, uncertain. Humans were known to be unpredictable, stubborn, emotional, and dangerous, and Elias felt every assumption cutting into him like invisible blades. He kept his posture straight, refusing to let his nerves show, refusing to look weak. A tall advisor approached him, an elder with shimmering white skin and silver veins glowing under the surface. "Human Elias Ward," the advisor spoke with a soft echo. "We welcome you to Aurelia." The words sounded polite, but the caution behind them was clear. The Empire had accepted him because politics demanded it, not because they wanted him. Elias nodded respectfully, but inside he felt like a tool, a pawn placed in the center of a board controlled by powers far greater than him. He followed the advisor through wide halls filled with floating lights that moved like living fireflies. The walls shimmered with images from Aurelian history. Great wars, ancient queens, forbidden galaxies. Everything felt overwhelming, as if every step pushed him deeper into a story written long before he was born. He walked quietly, but his mind raced, wondering if Princess Lyra feared him, hated him, or dreaded the marriage as much as he did. Part of him hoped she was kind. Another part feared she might be cold and distant, shaped by royal expectations he could never match. In her private chamber, Princess Lyra stood in front of a glowing mirror, her hands trembling as she tried to calm her breath. She wore a soft blue ceremonial gown woven with threads of light, but she felt no pride in it. Her reflection showed a girl trying to look strong while drowning in fear. She had cried earlier, but now she forced herself to stand straight. She had heard the ship arrived. She had heard her groom was being escorted toward the palace center. Her heart beat fast, not with excitement, but with a painful mix of hope and terror. She feared he would look at her with disappointment. She feared he would treat her like a burden, like a curse born from two worlds that hated each other. Her maid whispered, "Princess, he will see you soon." The words made Lyra's heartbeat stumble. She touched her face, wiped away the last sign of tears, and whispered back, "I don't know if I am ready." But she knew she had to be. Her marriage was not only about her happiness, it was about the fragile peace between two species that had once stood on the edge of war. She felt trapped by duty, but inside her soul, a small part wished her groom might understand her pain, even just a little. Elias continued walking through the palace until the advisor stopped before a pair of massive golden doors. Symbols danced across their surface like living script, glowing brighter as he approached. "Princess Lyra awaits you inside," the advisor announced with a bow. Elias froze for a moment, fear tightening around his throat. All the battles he had survived, all the danger he had faced, None of it prepared him for this moment. The moment he would meet the girl who was supposed to share his life, the girl whose tears had reportedly never stopped since the engagement was announced, the girl who might hate him simply for being human. The doors opened slowly, light poured out, soft, warm, and shimmering like dawn breaking across a quiet ocean. Elias stepped inside, his breath caught instantly. Princess Lyra stood at the center of the room, her silver blue hair falling like flowing water, her eyes glowing with gentle light. Her hands clasped together nervously. She looked delicate yet powerful, lonely yet regal, afraid yet brave. Elias felt everything inside him shift, as if the universe pulled him forward without asking him first. Lyra lifted her gaze, expecting to see a hardened soldier with cold eyes, someone who resented her, someone who would blame her for the marriage forced on them. But instead she saw a young man standing still as if struck by emotion, his eyes soft, shocked, aching, and full of something she hadn't seen in years. Kindness. Her breath trembled, her heart paused. Her tears didn't fall this time, they simply stopped, as if her soul suddenly recognized something familiar in him, something human, something gentle, something she thought she would never find. Elias took one hesitant step forward, feeling his heart melt under her gaze. He didn't know her. He didn't understand her pain yet. But at that moment he knew one thing clearly. She wasn't a burden, she wasn't a curse. She was a girl trying to survive a world that demanded too much from her. Their eyes stayed locked, silent, fragile, powerful, and the air between them felt charged with a destiny neither of them had chosen. But both of them were somehow meant to meet. In that first quiet moment, two broken souls looked at each other across the golden chamber, both realizing that everything they feared might change. Everything they believed might be wrong, and somewhere deep inside something new began to bloom. Something soft, something dangerous, something that felt like the start of a story that would shake the fate of their worlds. The moment Elias and Lyra stood facing each other, the chamber felt like it was holding its breath. The lights dimmed softly as if giving them space, and for a long, silent heartbeat neither of them moved. Neither of them knew what to say, but both could feel the weight of everything pressing on them. The duty, the fear, the hope that felt too fragile to touch. Elias felt a strange pull inside him, a soft ache he couldn't explain, and Lyra felt warmth rising in her chest, something gentle pushing back against the loneliness she carried for years. Lyra lowered her gaze first, not out of shyness but because she feared the connection in his eyes might break her. She whispered his name gently. Elias. Her voice sounded like a soft echo of starlight, trembling and unsure, and Elias felt the softness of it sink into him. He stepped closer, his voice low and careful as if he didn't want to frighten her. I'm not here to hurt you, he said, and those simple words made Lyra exhale shakily, because no one in her life had ever spoken to her like that. Not as a princess, not as a political symbol, but as a person who needed comfort. She lifted her eyes again, and this time she found the courage to hold his gaze a little longer. I know you did not choose this, she murmured. I didn't choose it either. Her fingers tightened around each other until her knuckles turned pale. Elias could see her fear clearly, but he also saw something else, a desperate wish for understanding. And he felt something in his chest twist. This girl, this princess caught between two worlds, was more human than anyone had ever allowed her to be. He moved slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently offered his hand, a simple gesture but powerful in its honesty. Lyra looked at his hand as if it were a mystery she didn't know how to solve. For a moment she hesitated, her breath caught in her throat. Then she reached out with trembling fingers and placed her hand in his. The touch was warm, fragile, and filled with unspoken pain. Elias felt her whole body shiver softly, and he didn't tighten his grip. He simply held her with the gentleness he wished someone had shown him when he broke under the weight of his own sacrifices. The moment broke when a distant bell sounded through the palace, a deep reverberating tone that signaled the arrival of council members preparing for the political ceremony. Lyra flinched slightly at the sound, her hand pulling back instinctively. Elias noticed the fear in her eyes deepen. Are you all right? He asked softly, but she shook her head, forcing a weak smile. They don't accept me, she whispered. Not as human, not as Aurelian, I'm something in between. Her voice cracked, the truth spilling out like a wound reopening. Elias looked at her, feeling anger rise in him, anger at her loneliness, anger at a world that judged her for something beyond her control. Lyra continued in a quiet voice that carried years of hurt. They think I'm too weak, too emotional, too different. And now they fear that you, a human, will make everything worse. Elias stepped closer again, a soft determination in his eyes. I don't care what they think, he said gently. I care about what you feel. Her breath trembled again, her lashes blinking fast as if trying to hold back tears that refused to fall. She had spent most of her life hiding her emotions. But now, in front of this human stranger, she felt pieces of her walls cracking. Their moment was interrupted when the advisor entered the chamber. Bowing deeply, Princess, preparations are nearly complete, he announced. But his eyes lingered on Elias with a hint of distrust, as if one wrong movement could confirm every rumor about humans being dangerous. Elias remained calm, though the scrutiny tightened something inside his chest. Lyra noticed it and felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She didn't want him to suffer because of her world's fears. She turned to the advisor, her voice steady. He is my chosen groom, she said softly but firmly. He deserves respect, the advisor bowed again. But the tension in his posture didn't fade. When he left, Elias looked at her with quiet surprise. You defended me, he murmured, and Lyra lowered her gaze again, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you defended me first. A small silence followed, soft and warm, like a fragile thread tying their hearts together. Elias felt something unfamiliar, something he hadn't felt since he was a child. A sense of being seen, being understood, and Lyra felt the same. As if for the first time she wasn't standing between two worlds. She was standing beside someone who understood struggle, pain, and hope. Later, the advisor led Elias to the training hall to prepare him for the ceremonial traditions. The hall was massive, filled with floating platforms and alien energy blades that hummed like distant thunder. Aurelian warriors watched him with sharp eyes, many whispering doubts about him. But Elias stepped forward with steady determination. He picked up a lightweight energy staff that vibrated in his hands, and when the warriors challenged him, he moved with the skills of a soldier shaped by real battle, ducking, striking, adapting faster than they expected. Whispers changed tone, some surprised, others impressed. A few even respectful. Lyra watched from a balcony above, unseen by the warriors, her heart racing as she saw Elias fight not with anger, but with a blend of courage and discipline. She saw how he protected without cruelty, struck without hatred, moved without fear. She whispered to herself, maybe he is not like the others. Her eyes softened as she watched him breathe heavily after the match. Wiping sweat from his brow, he looked strong yet human, confident yet hurting, and for the first time in a long time, Lyra felt her chest warm with something she dared not name. But in the shadows of the palace, unseen eyes watched them both. A masked figure whispered into a communicator, the Union is growing stronger. We must act soon. And somewhere deep within the Empire, plans were already unfolding. Dangerous plans that could tear apart everything Elias and Lyra were beginning to build. While above the training hall, Lyra continued watching the human groom who had already begun changing her world without even knowing it. Wondering why her heart refused to stay quiet anymore. Wondering why she suddenly felt afraid of losing him even before he truly belonged to her. The day of the public ceremony rose with a golden glow across the Aurelian palace, but beneath that beauty the air carried a strange tension, as if every wall, every torch of living light, every breath of the crowd sensed something dangerous moving in the shadows. Elias felt it the moment he stepped into the ceremonial courtyard, the ground humming softly with ancient energy. Thousands of Aurelians gathered around the glowing platforms floating above the silver floor, their eyes fixed on him with a mix of fear, curiosity, and silent judgment. Lyra walked beside him, her silver blue gown catching the light like flowing water, and though she tried to appear calm, Elias could see the stiffness in her fingers, the way her breath trembled as she tried to hide her fear. He leaned slightly toward her, speaking in a low, gentle voice only she could hear. I'm here. You're not alone. Lyra's eyes flickered up to him, soft and grateful, and for a brief moment her fear eased. She nodded and whispered, Thank you. That simple exchange carried more truth than any vow spoken for politics or treaties, but neither of them realized how soon those words would be tested. The ceremony began with the sound of crystal drums echoing across the courtyard. The emperor rose from his throne, tall and regal, his voice carrying over the crowd with power and pride. Today, he declared, we unite two worlds, not through war, but through courage, through sacrifice, through hope. The crowd murmured with conflicting emotions. Some bowed, some stared with anger, some whispered doubts. Elias felt their eyes drilling into him like spears, But he kept his back straight, kept his gaze steady, because Lyra stood beside him and he refused to let her face this alone. Lyra stepped forward when the Emperor called her. Her voice soft but steady as she spoke the ceremonial lines. But Elias noticed something strange in the crowd. A flicker of dark movement between the glowing pillars, a figure lowering his head too quickly, a hand clutching something under a cloak. Elias's instincts sharpened instantly, the same instincts that had kept him alive in battles across distant moons. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Lyra turned to face him for the next part of the ceremony, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to take his, but before she could, a sharp streak of blue light fired from the crowd, cutting through the air like a burning arrow. Elias's breath froze. Time seemed to slow. Lyra gasped as the deadly shard struck toward her chest with terrifying speed. Without thinking, without hesitating, Elias threw himself between her and the attack, his body twisting with a soldier's instinct, his arms wrapping around her as the energy shard exploded against his back, with a burst of blinding light. The force knocked them both to the ground, Lyra cried out, clutching him as the courtyard erupted into screams. Aurelian guards rushed forward, energy shields rising around the royal family. Chaos spread like wildfire as more hidden attackers fired shards of blue flame from the shadows. The rebels had come. The ones who hated the Union, the ones who believed that peace between humans and Aurelians was a betrayal. Elias groaned as pain seared through him, his back burning as if a star had kissed his skin. Blood warmed his shirt, but he still held Lyra tightly, shielding her with his body. Lyra's eyes filled with terror, her hands shaking as she touched his cheek. Elias, Elias, please stay with me. Her voice cracked like shattered glass. She had watched warriors fall before, but watching Elias collapse broke something inside her. Tears streamed down her glowing cheeks as she held him, the world around her fading into a blur of fear and desperation. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering broken words, begging him not to leave her. Above them, the Emperor roared orders, his voice filled with rage. Find the attackers, protect the princess, defend the Union. Guards chased the rebels who fled through hidden corridors, but the damage was done. The crowd trembled with shock, fear spreading through their hearts like rising smoke. Many stared at Elias with disbelief. Humans were supposed to be selfish, violent, untrustworthy, but this human had taken a lethal hit meant for their princess without a second thought. Elias tried to speak, his voice weak and rough. Are you hurt? Lyra shook her head desperately. No, I'm fine. You saved me. She placed her hand gently over his wound as if her touch could pull the pain away. Her tears fell onto his skin, glowing like tiny droplets of light. Elias felt the warmth of her closeness, the desperation in her touch, and he forced a weak smile. Good. I'm glad. His breath hitched, his eyes dimming for a moment. Lyra's heart twisted painfully. She pressed her hand against his cheek again, whispering, please don't close your eyes. Elias, stay with me, please stay. Her voice trembled like a wounded star. He tried to laugh softly, wincing. You're safe. That's all that matters. Lyra shook her head fiercely, her tears falling faster. No, it matters if you live, it matters if you stay. You matter to me. She didn't realize she said it until the words had already escaped her, her voice raw with fear and emotion. Elias blinked, surprised, touched, and before he could answer, the healers rushed forward and lifted him carefully. Lyra grabbed his hand, refusing to let go even as they carried him away, her heart pounding with terror and an overwhelming truth she could no longer deny. As they rushed him through the shining halls, Lyra leaned close to him, her voice breaking with emotion. I won't leave you, I'm here. I'm here. And Elias, fading in and out of consciousness, felt her fingers intertwined with his. Warm, trembling, desperate, the world blurred into golden light as he whispered back with a fading breath. I'm not going anywhere. Whether it was truth or hope, neither of them knew, but in that moment one thing became clear. The attack had changed everything, and the fragile bond between a human soldier and an alien princess had just turned into something powerful, something irreplaceable, something the enemies of peace would fear more than anything else. The healing chamber glowed with silver light as Elias lay on the floating crystal bed, his skin pale, his breath uneven, but his heartbeat strong enough to keep fighting. The strange Aurelian energy thread stitched through his wound like living light, pulsing softly as they repaired the damage piece by piece. Lyra sat at his side, her hands clasped around his, her gown stained from kneeling beside him during the chaos, her eyes swollen from crying. But she refused to look away. She refused to rest. She refused to let anyone pull her from him. She stayed close, breathing with him, waiting for him, praying that he would wake soon. because the silence of the chamber felt colder than death. The healers moved quietly around them, their voices low, their faces concerned. One of them whispered to the Emperor that Elias had taken enough energy to kill a lesser warrior, but somehow he survived. Somehow his human body endured the blast longer than expected. Lyra heard them, her heart tightening with fear and pride at the same time. She looked at Elias with trembling emotion, whispering softly, "You shouldn't have done that, but I'm so grateful you did." Her voice cracked as she brushed her fingers against his cheek. "I thought I lost you," she whispered again, her breath shaking. Hours passed, each minute stretching like a lifetime. Lyra never loosened her grip, even when her fingers went numb, even when the palace guards begged her to rest for a moment. She simply shook her head, whispering, "Not until he opens his eyes." Because the moment she saw him fall, something inside her shattered, something she couldn't rebuild without him. She remembered the way he shielded her, the pain in his expression, the warmth of his hands holding her even as he collapsed. She remembered the look in his eyes before the healers carried him away, a look that said he cared, a look that told her he wasn't just fulfilling duty. He had risked himself because she mattered to him. Outside the chamber, tension spread through the palace like a storm. The attack had shaken the Empire. Council members argued, soldiers tightened security. Some blamed humans, some blamed rebels. Some feared the marriage more than ever. But none of it mattered to Lyra. Not the politics, not the whispers, not the anger boiling through the halls. She cared only about the man lying in front of her. The man who had broken every expectation she held about humans. The man who made her heart feel alive for the first time in years. The chamber lights dimmed softly as night fell across the palace. Lyra's head rested gently on the side of the healing bed, her fingers still intertwined with his, when she felt the slightest movement. A soft squeeze, barely a breath of pressure, but enough to make her gasp and sit upright, her heart pounding wildly. Elias's eyes blinked open slowly, like he was fighting his way through darkness back into the world. Lyra leaned close, her breath trembling. "Elias, can you hear me?" she whispered softly, hope shaking her voice. Elias blinked again, his vision blurry, his body heavy, but then he saw her, her glowing eyes red from crying, her hands warm around his, her face filled with fear and relief mixed into something painfully beautiful. A small, tired smile touched his lips. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice hoarse but alive, and Lyra's breath hitched as tears slipped down her cheeks. She covered his hand with both of hers, pressing it against her heart as she whispered, you scared me so much." He tried to shift, wincing as the movement sent sharp pain up his spine, but Lyra gently placed her hand on his chest. "Don't move," she whispered, her voice soft and commanding at the same time. "You're safe, they're healing you. I'm here." Elias looked at her with quiet disbelief. "You stayed," he murmured, his tone soft, almost fragile. Lyra nodded quickly, her voice breaking. "I wasn't going to leave you. Not after what you did for me, not after everything." Elias studied her face. The worry etched into her expression, the softness trembling in her gaze. He felt something warm spread through his chest, something deeper than duty, something more powerful than fear. "I'd do it again," he said quietly, and Lyra's breath caught, her eyes shining with an emotion she couldn't hide anymore. "Why?" she whispered, her voice small. Almost afraid of the answer, Elias exhaled weakly, his voice trembling with honesty. "Because your life matters more to me than mine." Lyra closed her eyes as more. Tears slipped free, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from something gentler, something warmer, something she had been afraid to feel her whole life. She leaned closer, her forehead touching his gently, her voice barely a breath. "You matter to me too, Elias." The words felt like a confession, like a truth she could no longer deny. She didn't know when it happened. She didn't know how, but in the middle of terror, in the middle of chaos, her heart had chosen him without asking her first. Their closeness deepened the air between them, heavy and soft at the same time. Elias lifted a trembling hand to brush a tear from her cheek, his touch gentle despite the pain. Lyra held his hand against her face, her eyes fluttering closed, letting herself feel the warmth of him, letting herself believe that this connection wasn't a mistake, wasn't forced, wasn't political, but human, fragile, real. The door burst open suddenly, breaking the moment. The Emperor strode in with a heavy expression, guards following behind him, his voice deep and shadowed. "We have captured one of the rebels," he announced, his eyes shifting to Elias with something between respect and fear. "And he claims the attack was only the beginning." Lyra's breath froze. Elias forced himself to stay awake. The Emperor continued, his voice sharp. They plan to strike again, and this time their target is clearer. He looked at his daughter, his voice trembling with terrible truth. They want the princess. Lyra's fingers tightened around Elias's hand. Fear blooming again inside her chest. Elias, weak but burning with determination, whispered softly, They'll have to go through me first. And the Emperor, hearing the strength in his voice, finally understood why his daughter's tears had stopped the moment she met this human. Because Elias wasn't just her groom. He was becoming her protector, her heart, her hope, and perhaps the only warrior capable of standing between her and the storm that was coming. The night inside the palace felt unnaturally quiet. The halls dimmed to a soft blue glow, as if the walls themselves sensed danger drifting closer with every breath. Elias had been moved from the healing chamber to a guarded recovery room. But despite the pain still burning in his back, he sat upright on the edge of the crystal bed, refusing to rest, refusing to close his eyes, his body weak but his spirit burning with a sharp, fierce clarity. He could feel something coming, something dark, something violent, something that wanted Lyra more than anything else in the galaxy. Lyra stood near the wide window, her fingers pressed against the cold glass, staring at the glowing horizon outside. Silver forests dancing under starlight, golden towers shimmering like scattered suns. The beauty of her world could not calm her tonight. Her breath trembled. Her heart raced with fear. She whispered softly without turning. They won't stop, Elias. They won't stop until they destroy everything. Elias looked at her, his voice low, steady. Then we won't let them. Lyra closed her eyes, the strength in his words settling into her bones like warmth she desperately needed. But underneath that warmth lived fear. Fear of losing him again. Fear of watching him bleed for her again. Fear that she wouldn't survive the pain a second time. A sudden metallic howl cut through the silent palace, the sound sharp, alien, and violent. It echoed down the corridors like a warning. Elias's body tensed instantly, his soldier instincts snapping awake. Guards rushed past the open door, shouting orders in the Aurelian language. Lyra turned toward him, panic rising in her chest. Something's wrong, she whispered. Elias stood despite the pain, his jaw tightening. They're making their move. Lyra moved toward him quickly, placing her hands on his arms as if trying to hold him down. You're not ready, you just healed. You can't fight like this. Elias looked into her glowing eyes, seeing the fear trembling inside them. He placed his hand gently on her cheek. I can't sit here while you're in danger. Before she could answer, the lights flickered violently, then went out. The palace plunged into darkness, the walls humming softly as emergency energy activated. The blue glow dimmed until only faint lines of light traced the edges of the floor. Lyra's breath caught. Elias stepped in front of her, shielding her instinctively. Shadows shifted near the doorway, and then a figure appeared, one of the Imperial guards. His armor cracked, his breathing sharp. Princess! They breached the inner sectors, he gasped. Rebels. Cloaking devices. They're inside. Lyra's heart pounded painfully. Elias grabbed the guard's spare blade without hesitation, the weapon vibrating with soft alien energy in his hand. Where is the Emperor? He demanded. The guard shook his head, cornered, defending the eastern wing. But their target is still the princess. Lyra flinched at the words. Elias stepped closer to the guard, his voice sharp and commanding. Take us to her safe chamber now. But before the guard could respond, a beam of dark blue energy pierced his chest from behind. He collapsed instantly, his armor shattering like broken glass. Lyra screamed. Elias grabbed her, pulling her behind him just as a masked rebel emerged from the shadows. His armor black, his eyes glowing with hatred. The half-blood princess dies tonight, he hissed. Elias moved without hesitation, dragging Lyra back as the attacker fired another blast. The energy scorched the wall beside them. Elias lunged forward despite his injury, slamming into the rebel with raw human fury. They fell hard, wrestling across the glowing floor. Elias gritted his teeth against the pain stabbing up his spine. Using every ounce of strength left in him, the rebel hissed. You should have died in the courtyard, Elias growled, his voice shaking with rage. You won't touch her. With one sharp strike, he knocked the rebel unconscious, his breathing heavy, his body trembling from pain and adrenaline. Elias, Lyra cried, rushing to his side, helping him stand, her hands shaking as she touched the blood seeping through his shirt again. You're hurt. Elias shook his head, forcing himself upright. I can still move. Lyra pressed her forehead against his, her voice breaking. "Why do you keep risking everything for me?" Elias held her face gently, his voice soft. "Because losing you scares me more than dying." Her breath caught, her eyes shimmering with emotion so deep it almost hurt to look at. But there was no time. More footsteps echoed through the halls, rebels spreading through the palace like a rising storm. Elias grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her into the service tunnels behind the wall panels. The tunnels were narrow and dim, glowing faintly with cold blue veins of energy. Lyra's breathing grew unsteady as they ran. "These tunnels lead to the old communication tower," she whispered. "We can send a distress signal." Elias nodded, pushing through the pain. "Good. Stay close." They reached a junction when a sudden blast ripped through the tunnel, throwing Elias and Lyra apart. She hit the wall with a cry. Elias slammed onto his side, pain exploding in his back. Smoke filled the air, and through it stepped 3 rebels, their masks reflecting the cold blue light. "Take the princess," one growled. "Kill the human." Lyra scrambled backward, terror flooding her eyes. "No," she whispered. Elias forced himself up, his body screaming, his vision blurring. But he moved to shield her again, gripping the blade with shaking hands, ready to fight even if it killed him. One rebel lunged. Elias met him with a burst of desperate strength, their blades clashing in sparks of silver fire. Another rebel charged for Lyra, she screamed. But before he reached her, Elias spun, blocking the attack, taking a deep cut across his arm. Lyra crawled toward him, sobbing. "Please stop. You'll die." Elias pushed her back gently, his voice raw. "I won't let them take you." The rebels circled him, their blades glowing, their eyes burning with hatred. Elias stood tall, panting, bleeding, refusing to fall, refusing to bend, his entire body trembling but his spirit unbroken. Just as the rebels prepared to strike the final blow, a roar of Aurelian soldiers burst down the tunnel, golden energy flooding the space. The rebels turned too late, and in seconds they were overwhelmed. The captain stepped forward, grabbing Elias before he collapsed. "You protected her," he said with shock and respect. Alone, Lyra rushed to Elias, cradling his face in her shaking hands, tears falling freely. "You saved me again," she whispered, her voice breaking with love and fear. Elias leaned weakly into her touch, whispering, "I told you. They'd have to go through me first." She held him tightly, her heart burning with emotion, realizing she didn't just care about him. She needed him, she trusted him, she loved him. And as more soldiers arrived to escort them to safety, Lyra pressed her forehead against Elias's, her trembling whisper sealing the truth neither of them could deny anymore. "I can't lose you, Elias, not now, not ever." And even through the pain, Elias managed a soft, exhausted smile. "You won't," he whispered back, unaware that the next battle waiting for them would test that promise more than anything before. The throne room stood silent except for the faint crackle of golden torches, the air thick with the scent of smoke and fear. Elias stood beside Lyra, his body wrapped in fresh bandages, his arm bruised, his back still burning with pain, yet his stance was steady, his jaw firm. The human soldier who once arrived as a political sacrifice now stood as the shield between the princess and a world that wanted to tear her apart. Lyra stayed close to him, her fingers brushing his hand as if needing to feel he was still real, still alive, still hers, though neither of them had spoken the word love yet. Its weight filled the air around them like a quiet heartbeat. The Emperor paced before them, his long cloak trailing like flowing starlight, his voice low and troubled as he said, "The rebels have grown bolder. Their attack tonight was not a test, it was a message." He turned to Elias, his eyes sharp. "They knew you would protect her. Even in your weakened state, they fear what you two are becoming." Elias met his gaze without fear. "They fear unity," he said quietly. "They fear peace." The Emperor nodded, but tension wrinkled his expression. "And they fear the bond you have formed with my daughter." At those words, Lyra's cheeks warmed, her eyes drifting to Elias, and he felt something gentle stir inside him, something that hurt and healed at the same time. A sudden tremor shook the palace floor, soft at first, then growing stronger. The torches flickered wildly, and from the far end of the hall came a burst of dark blue energy that shattered the entrance doors with a deafening roar. Rebels stormed inside, their blades glowing with violent power. The Emperor shouted for guards. Aurelians clashed with the attackers, the sound of metal and energy echoing like thunder. Lyra gasped as one rebel pushed through the chaos, sprinting directly toward her with murderous intent. Elias didn't hesitate. He grabbed her waist, pulling her behind a pillar as the rebel's blade slashed past her shoulder, sparks exploding against the stone. The rebel turned to strike again, but Elias charged forward with fury burning through every vein. He shoved the soldier back, grabbing the fallen guard's weapon, the blade vibrating with raw light in his hand. The rebel sneered. "Human," he spat. "You should have stayed dead," Elias answered with a sharp strike, driven by pure instinct, blocking blow after blow as sparks rained around them. Pain shot through his back with every movement, but he refused to yield, refused to fall, refused to let Lyra face that terror alone. Their blades clashed again, the sound loud and sharp, until finally Elias twisted his weapon, knocking the rebel's blade from his hand and slamming him to the ground. More rebels pushed through the chaos, their voices shouting in rage. "Take the princess," one yelled. "The Empire falls tonight." Lyra stood frozen for a moment, her eyes wide with fear, until she felt Elias's hand find hers, gripping tightly, grounding her, protecting her. He whispered, "Stay behind me," and stepped forward again. Even as another wave of pain tore through his body, Lyra's heart ached as she watched him fight, every movement fueled by something stronger than duty, stronger than fear, something that felt like destiny pulling him toward the fire again and again. The Emperor's guards fought bravely, pushing the rebels back slowly, but the attackers kept coming, the hall filled with smoke and broken stone. Lyra felt her breath tightening as she saw a rebel break through the guards near the Emperor, raising a blade toward her father. Instinct took over. She ran toward him with a cry, her hands glowing with sudden light, a burst of energy exploding from her palms. It struck the rebel and sent him crashing into the wall. The entire hall froze, shock rippling through the crowd. Even Lyra stared at her hands in disbelief, trembling as the glow faded slowly. Elias looked at her with awe and concern, rushing to her side. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice soft but shaken. She looked up at him with wide eyes. "I didn't know I could do that," she breathed. Elias cupped her face gently. "There's more strength in you than anyone sees," he said softly. "More than even you see." Before she could answer, a scream echoed across the hall as the rebel leader, masked and cloaked in shadows, stepped forward, lifting a dark-bladed spear crackling with blue fire. His voice filled with hatred as he shouted, "This union ends now." The hall fell silent, guards hesitating as he leveled the spear at Lyra's heart. The leader snarled, "The princess dies, and peace dies with her." Lyra felt fear choke her breath, her hands trembling as the spear tip glowed brighter. Elias stepped in front of her instantly, his voice a cold whisper. "You won't touch her." The rebel leader lunged, the spear cutting through the air like a streak of lightning. Elias blocked it with a desperate swing, the impact sending shockwaves through his already wounded body. Pain exploded across his spine, but he held firm, their weapons clashing again and again, sparks lighting the darkness as Elias fought with a strength powered not by training but by love. Lyra called his name, reaching toward him, but he pushed forward, knocking the spear aside and driving his blade toward the rebel's armor. The leader stumbled backward, fury twisting his voice. "Why do you defy fate, human?" Elias breathed hard, sweat rolling down his face. "Because she is my fate." With one final surge of strength, Elias struck the spear aside, grabbed the leader's collar, and slammed him to the floor. Guards rushed forward, binding the rebel as he screamed and thrashed. Defeated at last, silence slowly returned to the hall, broken only by the sound of Lyra's soft footsteps as she approached Elias, her eyes shimmering with tears. He leaned weakly against a shattered pillar, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. Lyra cupped his face with trembling hands, her voice breaking. "You saved me again, Elias. You saved all of us." He looked at her with exhausted warmth, whispering, "I'm not letting anyone take you from me." Her tears fell freely now, glowing like soft stars as they touched his skin. She rested her forehead against his, her voice trembling with a truth she could no longer hold back. "I love you." Elias closed his eyes as those words washed over him, filling every broken part of him with warmth. He whispered back with a soft, breathless smile, "I love you too." The Emperor watched them in silence, understanding something powerful had formed between them, something unbreakable, something that could change the future of two worlds. Days later, under the light of twin suns, Elias and Lyra stood together before the Empire, dressed in ceremonial attire woven with threads of gold and silver. The crowd that once doubted them now watched with hope, with awe, with trembling belief. The Emperor's voice echoed proudly across the courtyard as he declared their union. And when Elias took Lyra's hand, she smiled with the softness of someone who finally found home. As they walked forward together, their fingers intertwined, the galaxy felt just a little safer, a little warmer, a little brighter. For a human soldier and an alien princess had rewritten their fate, not with power or law, but with courage, sacrifice, and a love strong enough to stand against darkness itself.